Michael Jackson is a free man tonight. He was acquitted today of all charges, pronounced not guilty on the 7th day of jury deliberations. His lawyers tried very hard to paint a portrait of an innocent, modern-day Peter Pan, a childlike 46-year-old man who simply loves children. In the end, the jury decided the evidence of child molestation and other charges was not enough, and in siding with Jackson's defense, they handed prosecutors a big loss in a very public case. Our coverage begins tonight with NBC's Mike Taibbi. Mike, good evening.
Evening, Brian. For more than a dozen years, there have been rumors fueled by a tabloid frenzy and obsession with Michael Jackson, 2 payoffs to earlier accusers that amounted to millions of dollars, and finally, starting in January, a trial in this case that lasted for scores of witnesses and finally came to a conclusion with that series of not guilties, 10 in all, at the end of the second week in June. When a British documentary in February 2003 repeated old rumors about Jackson, it also wrung this admission from him.
The most loving thing to do is to share your bed with someone.
That the pop star shared his bedroom with children, innocently, he said, including boys like this young cancer survivor. But that was enough to trigger a criminal investigation by a district attorney who had pursued Jackson for a decade.
Get over here and get checked in.
It took almost a year, but Jackson was arrested. The core of a 10-count indictment that charged that on at least 4 occasions at his Neverland Ranch, he had given alcohol to that cancer patient and then molested him. The boy and his siblings and mother all proved to be such credibility-challenged witnesses in the trial that most experts thought their testimony alone would not have led to a conviction.
Unless there's physical evidence, if this jury doesn't believe this boy, then there's no case.
But California is one of only a handful of states that in sex crimes trials allows testimony about old, unproven allegations. 3 of Jackson's alleged victims, notably the actor Macaulay Culkin, came to court to emphatically deny any inappropriate behavior by Jackson ever. But the cumulative effect of all that so-called propensity evidence, including Jackson's settlements with 2 earlier accusers, was undeniably powerful. Critically important, powerful, but not enough to persuade this jury that the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt had been met. And a short time ago, those jurors, all 12 primary jurors and 8 alternates, answered some questions about how they reached the decision they did.
I think we all just looked at the evidence and pretty much agreed.
I would just say that we considered all of the evidence, and of course, since it's a criminal trial, it had to be beyond a reasonable doubt. And in looking at all of the evidence and not just one specific item, I mean, that's the conclusion we arrived at.
And arrived at that decision in less than 7 full days of deliberation. A reminder, we have not yet heard from Michael Jackson himself, who's now returned to his Neverland Ranch, or from his lead attorney, Tom Mesereau. We're expecting to hear something from Mesereau at some point. Back to you, Brian.
Mike Taibbi in Santa Maria, California for us. Mike, thanks.
We, the jury in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of conspiracy as charged in count 1 of the indictment, not guilty of a lewd act upon a minor child, not guilty of administering an intoxicating agent to assist in the commission of a felony.
They put on witnesses who were lacking in credibility. A lot of their theories and arguments made no sense, and they didn't have a case. And Michael Jackson's innocent.
We expected probably better evidence, something that was a little more convincing.
In looking at all of the evidence and not just one specific item, that's the conclusion we arrived at.
I felt like we were really left in the dark about some things, and questions weren't answered, but we had to make do with what we had and the evidence that was given to us.
Well, obviously, we're disappointed in the verdict. 37 years, I've never quarreled with the jury's verdict, and I'm not going to start today.
Not guilty. 1 year ago today, Michael Jackson fans celebrated as a jury found him not guilty on all 10 counts of child molestation, conspiracy, and supplying liquor to a minor. Since then, the reclusive king of pop has been in self-imposed exile in the Middle Eastern kingdom of Bahrain. But he appeared in public for the first time last month at an MTV awards show in Japan. So what's he been up to since his acquittal? Joining me now, Inside Edition senior correspondent Jim Murray, who was in court every day of that trial. Hey, Jim.
Hi, Susan. It's hard to believe it's been a year, isn't it?
That's where I met you. I was there, too. That was a wild time. Hey, Jim, bring us up to date. What has the King of Pop been up to in this last year?
You know, there's so much that's been happening with Michael Jackson. You almost need a scorecard. It's because you can run but you can't hide, is the old saying. And Michael Jackson basically fled to Bahrain, but bad news and bad luck seem to have followed him. He's had a string of problems, among them financial problems. He had a $300 million debt, which he's been able to refinance, and basically putting up collateral for his Sony ATV catalog, which he owns 50%. That's the Beatles catalog that we heard so much about during the trial.
Wasn't that the thing he said he'd never, ever, ever sell?
Well, that was one thing he said he'd never sell. Another thing he said he'd never do is leave Neverland. And by all accounts, it looks like he's not only left, but left for good. The animals in that menagerie, the zoo, are being sold off, and Neverland is running on a skeleton crew right now. But Michael Jackson has even more problems. Susan, you remember one of the witnesses, Debbie Rowe, his ex-wife, with whom he had 2 children. She came to testify on Michael Jackson's behalf, and it was based in large part upon her testimony that those of us watching the trial thought the tide turned in Michael Jackson's favor. Well, she is now suing him basically for custody of those 2 children. She signed away the rights to those children. She was paid off, by some accounts, millions of dollars. But the California Supreme Court said Michael Jackson cannot have sole custody of those children. And Debbie Rowe is proceeding with what might be embarrassing news for Michael Jackson. She's threatening to bring forward in court documents next month evidence that Michael Jackson is not the natural father. This is just one of a series of problems that has followed him all the way to Bahrain.
So he's not even their dad?
Well, you know, those who have seen Michael Jackson's kids say it doesn't make sense. They're white children. Debbie Rowe is white. How could they be Michael Jackson's children? And there's some speculation that there was a sperm donor that Michael Jackson chose to impregnate Debbie Rowe, and that's how he had the kids. According to what we've read, the court documents may include the name of that father, and obviously that would be very embarrassing if it's true.
I got to ask you something. There's a report in the Daily Mail that says that he's getting married again and he's going to adopt another child, and I think he's going to be marrying, is it the nanny of these children?
Right, the nanny who's known as the enforcer among those close to Michael Jackson, because she keeps everything on a tight order. She runs a very tight ship. You don't get through to Michael Jackson until you get through this nanny, and you basically don't get through her. You know, every time I read something about Michael Jackson, I think nothing else could surprise me. And what happens, not only is there speculation that he might marry the nanny, but when he was in Japan, as you just reported, for that MTV award, there was also a report that he visited an orphanage, and Michael Jackson has indicated that he wants to adopt a child from that orphanage. Now think about this. This is a person who has been accused not once, not twice, but several times of molesting young children. Where does he go when he goes to Japan in hopes of rehabilitation? reestablishing his career, he goes to an orphanage.
Oh, make it stop, Jim. Make it stop. Jim, I got to ask you one last question. I just got to ask you this. You'll never forget, as long as you live, Pajama Day, will you? When he was so sick, he came up to court in his pajamas. How is his health now? How is he doing?
You know, it's hard to tell, because when he's in Bahrain, he's dressed very much like the women in Bahrain dress. You've seen him in this video. Look, he's still thin. Is he the Michael Jackson we remember? No, I don't think so. He's 47 years old. Could he get in good shape? Theoretically, but there are reports that he's addicted to various painkillers. I think his first priority has to be in putting his health in order, and then directing his efforts toward his career.
Wacko Jacko. They don't call him that for nothing. Hey, Jim, thanks so much for coming on the program. It's great to see you 1 year to the day when those doves went flying up in the air and he was acquitted.
Thanks, Susan.
Wacko Jacko. They don't call him that for nothing. We take you back to the story consuming cable news exactly 1 year ago today. For Access Hollywood's Tony Potts, at anyway, he covered the trial. He's now the weekend co-anchor and correspondent for Access Hollywood. And Tony, share with us some of the most memorable moments of that trial.
Well, number one, Allison, I think, was when it all started. The first day that Jackson was in court, he comes out, and what does he do? As we all remember, he dances on top of the SUV. I remember standing there looking at this and thinking, oh, Lord, the authorities aren't prepared for this. And as we moved around to the right of this picture you're looking at now, a sea of people just kept swarming up to him. And I looked around, and there were kids, parents who brought their kids in strollers, 3, 4 years old, and they're about to be run over. And there was one stroller that was on its side. I looked down, and there's a 3-year-old boy, and I look in his eyes, and he's terrified. So I'm running with a microphone in the left hand. I grabbed the boy with the right arm, and I put him into the flower beds, grab his parents, and say, what are you doing here? Get him out of the way.
Talk about what are you doing? I was in the what are you doing camp. Think about the day with the pajamas.
Well, no, exactly. And so I remember standing there looking at Michael on top of the SUV thinking two things. A, he's either laughing at the court system and he doesn't understand what's going on. Consequently, as you mentioned, Allison, the second one I think is the pajamas. We heard he was coming in, maybe not, at the hospital. Rumors all the time. When would he show up? And he shows up walking very gingerly in the pajamas. And we all looked at each other and thought, all right, this is some trial. It just continues to get weirder and weirder. Then the third thing was on verdict day, which you showed earlier, sitting 2 rows behind the Jackson family, his mom and his father. The air was so thick, the tension was unbelievable. Watching Michael walk in the courtroom, he looked like a zombie. He was expressionless, just walked very slowly in, sat down. There was no talking at the table with his attorneys. And then when the first verdict was read, you could see the family just let out a sigh of relief, although they were still nervous. I do have to tell you, Allison, in covering this whole thing, the most lasting image I have of the Jackson trial was that day, about 5 hours later. I'm walking around, I have my little DV camera. All the people have gone. There are a few stragglers about. There was garbage on the front of the courthouse lawn. And I'm looking back, and the sun is going down, and I'm shooting everything. And Jackson had just been found not guilty of molesting a little boy. And my camera comes upon, with the courthouse in the background, a little boy's blue sock. Lost, trampled, stepped on, and forgotten. And that was the lasting image I had. It was almost as if justice had been stepped on and tossed aside on both sides of the justice scale on that day, and I'll never forget that image.
A lot of people weren't satisfied with how that trial ended up, the result of that trial. So Michael Jackson, a year later, is there any opportunity that you think this man has to come back from this? He was found innocent, but clearly people still have difficult feelings about him and the trial and what has happened.
Well, remember, he was found not guilty, but not innocent. There's two different things on that one. I do think that not in the United States. I would be very surprised if he had any comeback in the United States. As you've seen in Bahrain and also in Japan and what have you, they still love him over there. They still idolize him over there. They don't understand what the fuss was about over here for the most part. There you see him with the veil and what have you in Bahrain just recently. So I think maybe over there. His album is in the works. We've heard that for a while. So we'll see what happens. But I think in the United States his market is gone probably forever.
Access Hollywood's Tony Potts, thanks so much for being with us today. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Allison. Great show, by the way. Very well done.
Thanks a lot, Tony. Think about the day with the pajamas.
And so I remember standing there looking at Michael on top of the SUV thinking two things. A, he's either laughing at the court system and he doesn't understand what's going on. And he shows up walking very gingerly in the pajamas, and we all looked at each other and thought, all right, this is some trial. It just continues to get weirder and weirder. Watching Michael walk in the courtroom, he looked like a zombie. He was expressionless, just walked very slowly in. And I'm looking back and the sun is going down and I'm shooting everything, and Jackson had just been found not guilty of molesting a little boy. And my camera comes upon, with the courthouse in the background, a little boy's blue sock. Lost, trampled, stepped on, and forgotten. And that was the lasting image I had. It was almost as if justice had been stepped on and tossed aside on both sides.
People weren't satisfied with how that trial ended up, the result of that trial. So Michael...
Well, remember, he was found not guilty, but not innocent. There's two different things on that one. Bahrain and also in Japan and what have you, they still love him over there. They still idolize him over there. They don't understand what the fuss was about over here for the most part. In the United States, his market is gone probably forever.